Welcome to the Founders Chat. In today's episode, we have Martin, co-founder of Synex. Welcome, Martin.
Good to be here. Hi.
Okay, so maybe we can start by you pitching Synex. What is Synex?
Synex is a startup which is a combination between consulting and software implementation that helps companies in Europe or selling in Europe comply with upcoming European regulations. There is a big package of European regulations that is regarding products, and namely, we're talking about textiles, furniture, batteries. What we do is we help these companies comply with this upcoming package and then provide them with the necessary digitalization layer in order to comply and maintain their products. Basically, our first customer base is the people that are manufacturing within Europe, but also retailers for foreign companies or importers for the foreign companies. So every single person that lays products on the European market for the
All right.
first time is the one that actually needs to comply with this. So what we do is we form two layers of different consultation and implementation services in order to help them depending on if they are retailers or they're actual manufacturers.
Okay, so basically, if I manufacture in Europe, I can call you to understand if I'm compliant. But if I import from China and I want to sell in Europe, I can still speak with you and see if the products are compliant with the European regulations.
Absolutely, indeed. For now, we have clear regulation mainly for batteries. So let's imagine the following scenario. You're a company from Romania and you are producing batteries. You contact us and you ask, I am producing this and this and this and this type of battery. Can you tell me which batteries need to be compliant? What are the stages that I need to go through? What is the regulation itself? I don't have the time to research it. I don't want to go into the project of assigning my own people that could focus otherwise on sales and product development to go and take overhead of compliance. So when they come to us, we absorb the project. We already are professionals in this area and we don't need to do the research. We connect with their team. We manage to map out their needs and dependencies based on the product that they have. And later we continue with each regulation step that they want a particular help from an external company because you have different layers. For example, you have supply chain due diligence, you have carbon accounting, you have digital battery passport, for example, in terms of batteries. And what we do is we give you the option to choose how much do you want us to integrate in the process.
I think it's a great niche in Europe. There are new regulations all the
Indeed.
time. And this carbon footprint is a big deal now. So I think the answer is pretty obvious, but why did you pick this industry and how did you start? How was the idea created?
First, when we were two co-founders, now we are three. My co-founder is called Nikolai Vasilev. He's also Bulgarian, and we met here in Madrid. I live in Madrid at the moment. And when we started the project, it was absolutely a different idea from what it is now. Our idea was to use the centralized technology in order to fight counterfeits that are entering the European market from major production centers such as Hong Kong, Turkey, and etc. Basically, we were focusing on high value products and using something called digital proof of ownership, where the chain of ownership starts from the production facility, which is, for example, Coco Chanel. And every time that the item is transferred, you also transfer the ownership like you're transferring the car or your apartment. This is basically where we started from. It's still product information and it's still some eligibility of the product. But after insane amount of research, one published paper and one collaboration with professors from IE University, it turned out to be a good market. However, all of our potential customers were forming a consortium and they were funding together a project to tackle exactly the problem we wanted to do. So at this point, we were pretty devastated, to be honest. It was like I broke up with a girlfriend. The dream was gone. We couldn't compete. Two Bulgarians, one master graduate and one current bachelor degree student trying to fight against trillion dollar cumulative amount companies. Absolutely impossible. So one day I was going through the website of this project and I was wondering what didn't figure out. And the only thing that we didn't figure out was called digital product passport. When I researched to that, it turns out that this is the whole European regulation. And namely, we were discussing textiles. When I researched, it turns out that there are going to be plenty of industries that are going to need to implement this digital product passport, which is part of a bigger framework called Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or also known as ESPR. Then we started exploring that this is actually a whole package, which is called Product Directive, and it's going to implement all of the industries that I mentioned earlier in our chat. And from there, we decided, are we going to sound sexy in a bar and say, hey, I'm going to fix the problem with counterfeits, although probably I'm not going to be able to sell to anyone, or we can actually provide value to companies because everyone that is in Europe knows that regulation is a huge overhead. And at this point, the decision was, do we want to sound cool or we want to earn some money?
This is really interesting. I was going to ask you later about the pivots, but yeah, it's really interesting how you ended up working in a super, super, super niche industry. Usually, people building products in such niche industries are people that have 20 years of experience in the industry, and they know that there is this small pain. But in your case, you started something different. Big competitors came, so you pivot fast, started building the solution for the ESPR, which is great. So you mentioned that you were out of school. So did you have a different job before, or this is your first one?
So I I've tried since little to be everywhere. To be honest, I started my first job on an illegal age, which I'm not going to discuss here for legal reasons. But
Yeah.
when I was 16, I got my first part-time job. I was
Okay.
working for a company that was doing soil analysis. Then I moved to essential oils, and further I started doing my own projects. So more or less since 16, actually in 17 was my first project, which turned out to be a company that I'm going to leave when I left my high school. Then I joined another project with which I stayed for a little bit, which was a publishing company. And now it's this one. So I've always tried to study, especially the things I like, and not in parallel to that to do what I love, which is to build.
So, and what's your role in the company? What is your background?
So I'm semi technical in terms of particular topics. My technical co-founder is gonna kill me if I say I'm technical, but I'm good in maths. I've been doing statistics for quite a few, so at this portion of the technicality, that's me. I try to take management and sales roles because this is usually what yields the best results. We are startups, and I'm not really fond of the idea of saying, hey, I am a CEO, hey, I am a CTO, because at the end of the day, that's a title that holds absolutely no value at the background. I can say I'm a CEO of, I don't know, 4 acres of fog. Doesn't mean that I have some value behind me. So I'm a business co-founder mainly, although I also engage in some technical aspects.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, and before that, you mentioned how do you keep the balance? Do you keep a balance? Do you have a routine? Do you do sports? How is your regular day?
I do sports. I actually last summer I started competitive weightlifting. I have been going to the gym for quite a few years, but I started competitive weightlifting with a goal to compete 1 year from now. This is more or less the sports aspect of my life. In personal relationships, honestly, it's not me that you should ask. It's more about my girlfriend, which always understands when I don't have time, when I'm tired. Just before I entered the interview, I was with her, and I mentioned that I have slept 5 hours yesterday, and I'm trying to keep up with everything. So big kudos that she actually understands me. But at the end of the day, we have our priorities, and I'm a big fan of people which sit down, figure out what is their biggest priority, and then figure out the rest. Which, I mean, we are not we are not people that can really fundamentally multitask. We need to focus on one single thing, then go to the other one sequentially. So what I do is, for every single part of the day, I try to prioritize and only think on the thing I'm working on, because otherwise we're doing very surface work.
Yeah. And I find this harder and harder with all these apps with the quick dopamine shots, the shorts and everything to focus for long periods of time.
I don't have social media. The only social media I have is LinkedIn. I deleted my social media on September 2024.
1 year now. So,
1 year and a little bit, and that has been one of the best decisions in my life. Yes, I have my own ways of distracting myself, but there is absolutely no productive value in the vast majority of social media.
yeah,
Honestly, you I don't want to spend the time training an algorithm that can switch immediately to what we call nowadays brain rot and then go into the same loophole again. Doesn't make any sense.
yeah, I completely agree. All right. So, is there something from your early story that most people don't know?
It's interesting. Yes, there actually is. Before 10th grade, I was absolutely without any direction in my life, and I was going out with really wrong people, which is not very hard in the Balkans, since I'm from Bulgaria. So before 10th grade, I was medically addicted to playing video games, and I was medically addicted to another substance,
Wow.
and
But
I
how
actually
old were you?
I was 10th grade. 10th
Okay.
grade is, I guess, 17, 16.
Okay.
16.
Okay. Wow.
And during quarantine, one day I looked myself in the mirror and I decided that I'm going to change everything from one day. And since that day, I have been working nonstop. And since that day, I have never, it's a ritual already. I have never washed with hot water. It's just my way of keeping all of my promises. This
Wow.
is an interesting fact for me.
That's really inspiring. Wow, that's amazing. I tried cold showers, but sometimes I get a cold. Sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah.
It's a thing that you get used to. I'm not going to dive very deeply into that concept, but the moment that you actually start accepting your environment is when things start to get easier. And that applies to many concepts in life. It's just the way that you learn it. My way was through a simple thing as cold showers. Every time I enter a hard environment and I want to escape, I say no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to try to do my best.
Yeah. Wow, that's really nice. Okay, so now that you touch this topic, because this is a great example of changing your life. So, what advice could you give to somebody watching this that is in a bad situation? What is the first step to changing their lives?
I talked to a friend, I think 2 or 3 days ago, who is in a hard situation, and I've always tried to give the same advice. If you're suffering what people would consider depression, I believe that this is a time that your brain needs to process a lot of things, and a big amount of the overload is also affecting your daily life. So be patient in the first place. And second of all, don't stop your life because there is something that is going wrong. I have been through two moderate, not severe depressions in my life. And the best thing that has worked for me is continue everything except the things that are not going well, and then take a rest from them, but never forget about your other life, because at this point you're fighting to not lose more, not to win. Everybody is going through their hardships. What is important at the end of the day is how much you lose and how much can you regain afterwards. So try to focus on the things that are going well. Try to understand that that's not the only aspect of life. And then I think things are getting better and better the more your brain process the hardships you're going through.
Okay, so basically one step at a time and be patient.
I think that patience is what our generation is suffering the most, and part of it is contributed through social media, but part of it is the toxic success culture and the success hustle culture, and a lot of the delusional things that young people think they can accomplish, which later drives them to not actually receive their results and become demotivated. The motivation by itself leads to another things. So try to understand more or less who you are and what actually is possible for you, and never get discouraged and be patient. These are my advice, and this is what I give all of my friends.
Very inspiring. Thanks. All right. So maybe let's switch to work again. Which AI tools are you using?
I mainly use ChatGPT as everyone else. If we're being a little bit more technical here, I'm probably only using Google and ChatGPT and OpenAI because at the end most of the tools are used from them. In school, I'm focusing around ChatGPT and Notebook LM. In business, I am using the tools that are starting to get integrated in all of our softwares that we're using. For example, HubSpot has I would say pretty decent AI. In Apollo, there is another AI tool that gives me a good benefit. I'm starting to use Perplexity, especially Comet, in order to um, screen potential customers, because for our industry, you need to actually go through their website and understand if they're actually a retailer, if actually they have a product that is above the thresholds for compliance. Things that have agents inside give us a lot of benefit in terms of the business. And more or less, that's it. And Google also, thank you, Gemini, but I have been able to write so many more emails on the same hour than previously. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, everything is moving so fast.
It is indeed.
I remember at the beginning I was using just ChatGPT. Then I tried Perplexity, and it's amazing when you need to do some research because Perplexity cross-check
Yeah,
the things that it's saying are correct, right? Yeah, Comet is pretty nice as well to scrap information out of websites.
absolutely.
And I tried Comet at the beginning when it was a beta, and now it got much better.
I was invited for the beta as well. I remember it was no different than just uh, overlay of Chrome plus extra installed Perplexity everywhere. Now actually it makes decent sense. Well, I remember when ChatGPT, just before ChatGPT became a thing, I think it was November 2023,
Yeah.
2020. I texted a very close friend of mine, I need to tell you something, but you need to keep it a secret. I found my ultimate tool for everything, and it was ChatGPT 3.
Yeah.
And now when I take a look, because I'm still in my same account, and thankfully they're saving some of the chats. And when I see the way that I have been interacting with this tool, is a little bit like a caveman. I try to explore what it can it do and what it can. And I remember the surge of different ideas that came to my mind, what actually I can build around this tool. Unfortunately, we were too young, and most of the people that were in our network were not qualified enough to actually sit down and do an AI startup, which is a problem that you suffer in Bulgaria. Usually, if you're in high school, people are not oriented to work; they're either oriented to enjoy their lives. And for young people that want to innovate, sometimes this can lead to suffering. But in terms of AI tools, I thought that I'm gonna keep the secret, but unfortunately, it became one of the largest companies in the world. So not a secret anymore.
Yeah. But I think it's still kind of super advantage for the people that are using it because it's still not 100% of people. Like it's small percentage that are using AI in their daily basis. So we are part of that generation, and I think it's still an advantage. But over time, what I'm seeing now more and more is that 2 years ago you were using AI and it was great because you were building super fast and you were having customers fast and everything. And now more and more people are using it. It's kind of stopping being a huge advantage because everybody else is using it. So I think the standards raised a lot.
It's an unfair advantage. It became a standard to try to implement AI everywhere. What I can see in our industry is that there are starting companies. I don't really like to consider um, most of them startups because they're not bringing any innovation on the table. We are trying to wrap an open AI API and use generation to sell their product as a digital product passport service provider platform, purely AI, which basically encapsulates a short prompt keep everything narrow and stay to the context window. So what I see is that there are two sides of the coin. There are people that actually can implement AI and can make something productive, and there are also people that just want to use it as the next marketing campaign. The thing is, what is going to happen if you implement AI? People have big expectations because they're seeing the average movement inside the industry, and then the only thing you can provide is one step above a chatbot, because that's not a value. That's just an unfortunate expectation.
Yeah. I really think that this thin layers company on top of fundamental AIs are very short lived. It's like I think they are going to a lot of these companies are going to die in the next couple of years. And now that, for example, before Comet was a thing, I had this idea because I had the need of scrapping, and I was like, wow, maybe I can just build the Chrome plugin, right? And I plug AI, and then Comet came up, and I think we are going to see more and more like the OpenAI, Google with Gemini, and now the different models, Perplexity, Anthropic, all these big ones. I think they are going to become generic enough to address any problem, right? So
In the last years, defensibility changed. If you remember 2, 3 years ago, when you go and you pitch your idea, probably the first or the second question anybody would ask you if they're inside the startup world is, where is your defensibility? And this changed. Now we're seeing wraps and wraps and wraps around 3 or 4 big companies, and people can win money, and VCs are betting millions on wrappers or fine-tuned models from another company. Previously, if you used another tool in order to get extra value proposition that they can just in a snap of a finger with maybe 10% of their workforce create the same tool, that was not considered defensible. Nowadays, this is a whole product and people are betting a lot of money
yeah,
on it, which is very interesting alignment with what Sam Altman says. If you're thinking of doing something that wraps around AI, don't. We're gonna do it if it makes financial sense. Just
yeah,
just don't.
yeah. Now I think I agree with you. I think I understand why, and it's because if you build a good wrapper and you manage to get a big user base, then the users are yours, and then you can grab against other provider. But the downside is you need to be able to do this super fast because otherwise it makes no sense.
I mean, what happened when ChatGPT started being able to read PDFs? All of the small startups that were regarding OCR, enhanced OCR technology, went down. And we can see it in multiple industries. Data analytics, the moment that OpenAI introduced the data analytics ability of ChatGPT, I don't want to mention names, but a lot of startups went really, really down. And they were pretty good wrappers of ChatGPT. The problem is that they are wrappers of the company that actually holds the real defensibility.
Yeah,
And it's pretty interesting. And now with my university, I'm contributing to hosting a hackathon with Lovable. Lovable is a pretty interesting use case because they are indeed a wrapper, but they're allowing people to create wrappers themselves and at the same time also test and rapidly develop different ideas, which I believe is the way to go nowadays. If you want to make a product, try to become an enabler rather than a simple wrapper that can be just replicated immediately from the bigger company.
exactly. So I think if the wrapper is complex enough that adds a lot of value, for example, I am thinking about Cursor now because Cursor use
Indeed, it's a VS Code with different models wrapper.
exactly, yeah. But the difference is that it indexes all the code, so you don't need to give the models all the context every time, and it's really hard to replicate. And now they own the customers.
They have defensibility.
Yeah,
They do have defensibility. The thing is that they don't use as a primary point of selling that they have OpenAI functionality inside. They have multiple models and they're more or less model agnostic. We can see Claude, we can see different models from chat, we can see even I believe there was even at some point they were using a custom model. I'm not sure about this, but their core defensibility is the indexing. And that's how I think people in the AI industry should move. We, in our startup, we have said that AI will be used in order to enhance our own productivity. But if we don't need to put AI somewhere, we are not going to put it, because this can either complicate or get stuff wrong. I'm
Yeah.
coming from statistical background, and more or less I know how these tools work. For most of our industry, especially in compliance, you need something really, really accurate. When you're complying on a when you're relying on a probabilistic model in order to get compliance, it's a pretty risky move. Maybe it's cheap, but is it worth it? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, you could use this. I mean, you could use AI maybe to estimate, but then to certify that somebody is compliant or not, I think it requires manual
You can
interaction.
use it to write stuff, but you cannot use it currently to, for example, we were testing how AI can cherry pick from a dirty data set only the columns that we're going to need for the compliance. So we can directly connect with, for example, SAP. We can crawl SAP and we can get only the information that we need. So the customer can only click two buttons and have their passport. The problem is that AI, again, it's probabilistic. So every single ERP for medium to big company is constructed completely different, which means that you cannot fine tune it. You cannot do anything. You can maybe teach it how to recognize particular information, but you cannot guarantee to your customer that you are going to have the accurate result 100% of the time. And this is where our industry is not going to change, especially in the plugins.
Yeah, fully agree. All right. So going back to the your main industry, regulation and compliance in Europe,
Mhm.
what do you think that is going to happen? Because we hear a lot now in social media that Europe is falling behind in innovation because of all these regulations and taxes and other things, in comparison with the US and China. What is your opinion?
My opinion is, especially, very very much depends on if we are going to speak on a micro or a macro level, micro being our regulation itself or macro being in general. I think Europe has always been the most cautious in choosing how things are going to grow. A good example I like to give here is that we are never getting fully mad at Apple, although they're integrating everything very very late, but they still are very very successful. If you look at Europe and Silicon Valley, Europe has twice more unicorns compared to San Francisco, which is the main source of unicorns in the US. And we are seeing companies like Lovable proclaiming that they are going to stay in Europe. And the question is why? The answer is because of talent. Coming back to regulation, I think that there is a lot of unnecessary burden, but there is also efforts to simplify it, which we can see in what is called simplification acts that they're being published in Europe. Ours, for example, every single, for example, battery regulation, textile regulation, everything is going to be merged in a product act. And tools like the digital product passport are one of the efforts of the European Union to simplify the way that people are providing data to different regulatory bodies, because it's a centralized ledger of information. At the end of the day, you don't need to go send something, wait for it, there was a mistake, go back again, and just all of this repetitive process when that you can currently see in manufacturing. You can easily supply data throughout the whole value chain. You can enable direct communication with the individual customer. So there is some sort of value when it comes to the digitalization there that Europe wants to import inside
Okay.
companies, at least on our level. In other regulations, I have a little bit of experience with REACH, which is the chemicals regulation. There, we saw a lot of backlash, and actually some things got postponed just because companies are not seeing value in them. I believe that this is not going to be the case with our regulation, and I believe Europe is going to push it up to the end.
Okay, this is great to hear. So, what I'm hearing here is that Europe is actually trying to simplify um, regulations in
Indeed.
the future. And also, your opinion, which I share, is that we have super good talent in Europe. and this can be an advantage. Of course, if the regulation pressure is too much, the good talent end up going somewhere else. But
To the
hopefully,
H1B visa.
yeah, yeah. It's they're making it harder, and also I think there are a lot of, I mean, there are pros and cons in Europe, but I think there are a lot of pros as well. Living in Europe is
Absolutely.
nice.
Europe is a great place, and there is a great amount of smart, capable people. And the main point of staying in Europe as a scale up, what I have seen and what I have spoken with successful startups and scale ups, is that it's talent. Yes, taxes in some countries, for example, Spain, are problematic. In general, here there is a lot of big amount of opportunities, and at the same time there is a lot of talent that can use them, and we are able to harness this. I believe that what's happening right now in the US is contributing greatly to the amount of startups we are going to see raise and then further scale in Europe. And I think things are going to progressively level.
Yeah, hopefully,
We hope. I'm going to stay in Europe.
nice. Yeah, me too. At some point in the past, I was thinking seriously about going to the US, but now I think I'm going to stay here.
I think very much depends on the way that you want your life to go, both professionally and personally. A lot of the cities in New York, especially when it comes to, for example, San Francisco, are purely based on your status, and they're gonna make you work a lot. They're gonna make you give your best in order to achieve the best results, in order to fit. The problem is that the place that you're going to feel the best and the most comfortable? Is that the place that you want to start from scratch? Can you survive it? And is it worth it? Can't we find something closer by that can give us similar results and is going to make us work the same way? I believe that there are hotspots in Europe and as a continent, not as the European Union, where
Yeah,
you can definitely harness most of the benefits that you can find in the US.
yeah. Cool. So now I'm going to ask you a personal question. What is success for you?
For me, success, that's actually a very good question, and I really like to answer it. For me, success is when you're the first person that people think when they are looking for help. This is where I find my success. I don't find success in money, because for me they are only a vehicle towards particular goals. So at the end of the day, for me, making something valuable and being able to help someone and make their life easier is definitely what I consider success.
That's great. Thank you. And all right, if you have to send a message to your customers today, what message do you send?
The train is coming and you still don't know about it. Look around. I'm gonna give you a little bit of context of what I'm saying. Companies tend to wait to the last moment in order to gain their compliance, which usually yields, first of all, a lot of stress inside the company when it comes to the implementation. It yields some risk, especially nowadays with our regulation. If you don't comply on time, your product is not going to be allowed on the European market, which is a big problem. Start doing your research and contact people that can help you with this if you actually want to focus on your product and your sales, because compliance can be simple the moment you start thinking in advance for it.
I have a question for you because how do small companies know if they need to be compliant? Maybe they are not and they don't know.
There are multiple sources they can use for information. First of all, usually that's the goal of the executive level, to make sure that everything aligns. It can be a compliance officer that is related to this under compliance, even a compliance executive. It can be that they learn through their associations and local organizations that are supporting them. It can be by reading news. It can be randomly. It can be through actually going to which is the best case scenario, going and checking in with the European news, which you can find under the page of the European Commission. There is also something called the legislative train, which people tend to use when they want accurately to measure what is the stage of particular regulation.
But
And it,
imagine that you and me, we discover that we can buy super cheap phones in China, import them, and sell them in Europe. Technically, we could do this without being compliant, right?
Very much depends on which regulation are you referring to. I think that if it's not written inside a particular article in a regulation, it's definitely not going to yield you any problems. But there is also regulations that are on national level. So very much depends where you're selling as well. Because, for example, in textile industry, there have been sustainability in textile regulations for quite a few time, and they actually have an alternative to the digital product passport. But this doesn't mean that if a French company is producing and selling in Spain, they need to have this digital product passport if they're selling in Spain. And the same way goes for fintech or for any other industry. I mean, at the end of the day, your main goal is to find a product market fit and then make sure that this actually stays valuable on the market, which means I have enough customers and it's financially viable, but it's also regulatory viable. A lot of a lot of drug production is very financially viable. The thing is that it's illegal.
Yeah. Okay. So the advice is basically if you're selling anything in Europe, do the research and understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can There are a lot of programs, and look, there are two sides of the coin. Europe provides a lot of regulation, maybe a little bit more lagging when it comes to innovation. But the moment that you make something innovative, you can apply for so much funds that are clustered in the same space, that it's it's really valuable, and these are usually money that you don't need to give back, because nowadays a lot of the venture capitalists are not giving you, actually they're not risking a lot, they're using convertible debt. Then at the end of the day, what's the difference between going to a VC and going to a bank? Most of the venture capitalists are not engaging that much with the startups anyway, after they give them the ticket.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Now that you mentioned venture capitals, are you planning on fundraising in the future or just bootstrapping?
For now, we are going to bootstrap. We are going to take the step towards venture capital only if we see that we are being able to scale massively with the platform. Because what we do is we consult, which involves a lot of personal connection to the company, which is scalable only if you have more people. But when it comes to software, as you know, the SaaS business model is usually revolving around unsupervised adoption. If we find out that we can do something like what OneTrust did back ago and go through several countries, do a big rally on explaining the regulation, helping companies, and informing them, we are definitely gonna need funds for that, and we're going to extend requests towards venture capital. But if that's not the case, I'm going to try to stay away as much as I
Okay.
can from them.
Yeah. Very wise. Nice. Okay. And I think we have covered mostly everything. So I'm going to ask you a last question. And this one is, what is your superpower as a founder?
Wow, what is my superpower? I am very good at finding people, connecting them, and making them work on the same goal. This is my superpower. Everything else is used. What I do, basically, a superpower is manage to connect other people with a lot more superpowers than me.
Amazing. All right. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure indeed.
Thank you.